you're painting. Now I've put a bigger piece of paper on my board. I've put masking tape all around it, as I did with the little exercise. This will give a lovely finish when the painting's completed. So when I start, I'm going to start by putting in a little bit of this background. I probably will rub out the pencil lines because I don't want to see any of the graphite coming in through the watercolour. Watercolour is very transparent, and you want to try and avoid having it showing heavy pencil lines if you possibly can. So I'm going to start with this area of the background before I actually move on to the objects. I'm going to keep that quite sort of simple and cool and light. I don't want it too strong. I want the main subject, which is the little saucepan and the two, the spatula and the ladle to actually, sorry, the masher and the ladle to be what we focus on. So first of all, I'm going to actually dampen the back of this area of the subject of my composition. It's the edge of the dresser, which the table is sitting in front of, and I just thought it was quite interesting, the contrast of that, just a little bit of architecture or a little bit of architectural shape in the background as just a point of reference, really. Now it's important that where you put the water is where you want to put the paint, and if you put the water on without carefully painting around the shapes, the colour that you put on will run into those shapes, and I don't want that to happen. I just want to paint this area of the dresser and no more. So I'm keeping it away from my objects, away from my still life that I've set up. Okay, now there's quite a lot of water on there. So I'm now going to do this wet into wet technique. And as I said before, I like to give it a little bit of a blot so it's not totally wet. And now it's ready more or less to actually apply paint to. It's still a little bit shiny. Okay. So I'm starting with a very, very weak solution of raw sienna, very weak, just to put in a little bit of background in this area behind the table. First consideration of the background. It's not very much painting there, but there's enough. And I'll come back to it and sharpen up certain things, strengthen up certain things, but at the moment that's sufficient. So it's very, very light and very, very loose initially. I'm now going to move on to the objects in my painting, and I'm going to block in some of the shape. Now I've already had a consideration of this masher, so I'm going to start with him. He's the object that's closest to me. Put plenty of water and very little colour really at this stage, just to actually indicate where the tones are, get the subject painted in lightly initially, so I can see what I'm dealing with. Remember to work on the tip of your brush and not to pick up too much paint when you're doing these very small areas of a shape. Just slap the colour on. You have a bit more control at this stage. Now the ladle is sort of similar, but it's got a lot of it's much more reflective because obviously there's more metal here. So this edge is very, very light. So I'm going to leave it white. That's, if anything, if you want anything to act as a highlight, a real sharp highlight, then leave it the white of the paper. In watercolour, generally speaking, you do not use an opaque medium of white mixed with the colour because it has a very different effect. So the paper has to act as your white. The other aspect, of course, is that the light coming through the colour has an effect as well. So I'm just going to now indicate some of the tones on this, the back of this ladle. I'm going to use both of my greys that I've mixed up, the initial greys, the bluey one, and the warmer grey. So I'm using both, and I'm just painting in an indication of what's going on this ladle. I'm not going to put it in to develop it too far at this stage. So it's really a quick application of water. Now, I didn't wet the surface of this, but I can go back into the water and just apply it with the colour as I'm working to soften things. So that, you know, there's not very much there at the moment. The other thing are these cast shadows. I think these are wonderful, and you know, that's what I'm seeing in the painting, in the still life, and I want to get that into my painting. So I'm going to start by pushing some of those in as well. I should do this one up here. Again, plenty of water, very little colour initially. And just, you can actually paint with the water from the pot because it's already got some colour from when I clean my brush. It's useful to not ignore that. So I'm putting water down for a moment. Now, don't let your wet areas of the painting touch another wet area, otherwise they will automatically run together. So you have to be aware of that as you're painting. So I've left a little rim of white there for the minute. I'll go back into the colour and maybe drop some colour in here now. Use my paper towel if I want to lift things out. It's too wet at the moment, so I'll use my brush and draw up some of the water. I'm basically using my paper towel, which is invaluable, taking the paint on my brush, just dabbing it onto the wet paper. Right, so I think I'm now ready to start working on the little saucepan at the back. So again, it's going to be quite loose to start off with, and then I will build the colour up as I go on. So I'm looking down into the pot saucepan, and it's pretty dark both inside and out. So just going to start off with a fairly dark grey to indicate this form. I've left a double line deliberately because that little edge of the saucepan is catching the light, and I don't want to obliterate it. I want a bit more control here initially, so I'm not using wet into wet. I'm just putting the wet paint onto the dry paper. into the shape. Right. So. I've got to make a difference, obviously, between this spatula, this ladle rather, and the saucepan. I mean, the saucepan is black, but I want this ladle to be a light shape, relatively light shape, against this dark shape. So it'll be important to get this dark shape as dark as I can fairly quickly, so that I've got something to work against with the ladle. Again, I'm having to be a bit cautious because a lot of it is very wet around here. And I don't want these wet edges touching each other at the moment. Right.